Welcome back to day 31 of our chess journey to 1500 ELO on chess.com. Let's just jump on ahead into our game today and see who our opponent's going to be. We get Boris Fedotov from Ukraine, and we will go on ahead and play 1d4. This is a new move to me. I'm not quite familiar with the ideas behind it, but we will just go on ahead, I think, and grab the center first of all, probably. Just want to make sure this is playable. Yeah, they can't push their pawn as we would mess up their king safety. The Anglo-Slav opening. Well, as I'm not quite sure as to what the theory is here, I think we'll just play as solidly as possible. Here I think we might have enough tempi for fianchettoing our bishop and getting it onto this good diagonal here. Or at least it might become a good diagonal. Alternatively, I think knight to c3 is a good move here, because it's a move we're probably going to play either way. So let's go for this instead. Our opponent is playing quite a passive setup here. I'm not quite sure here, as at my skill level, I'm not sure as to whether we are able to fully take advantage of their lack of center control, for example. There might be an argument of playing e4 here, just grabbing the entirety of the center, but that would weaken our d4 pawn. We might play g3 to get in this move, but the reason I'm not really liking this move is because I want this bishop to play the game, and if we play this, then this move could end up getting our bishop kicked out, perhaps. I think we'll go on ahead and play our bishop out here, and then see what they do in response. They fianchetto, and we will go on ahead and finish our pawn chain here. This move seeks to jump in here or just simply to castle. And now we have to make a decision here. Do we go here or here with our bishop? And I think because if we go here, this move is met. Rather, if we go up here, this move is met with this, and they can't maintain the pin, as they would trap their bishop. So we will go to the more active square in the middle here, I think. They are likely to castle, and we will do the same, I think. Just going to make sure we don't have any other ideas here. But their position is quite solid here, I think. So we probably have to make a more long-term attack here against our opponent. We will play this. And they capture. So now we are playing with the bishop here, which typically speaking doesn't have to be a massive advantage, but it's generally quite good if we have the option of opening up the board was what I was going to say, but here we have to be a bit careful. This would be a double threat. So it looks like our opponent finds a good move here. I'm liking this move in response, simply because we attack their knight 2 times. But do we have a good move here? Let's look at this. If we go like this, I don't think our opponent could capture here as easily as they might want to, because we will have this move. And I think we end up at least equal in material. They go for this. And I think we are essentially forced here to capture this knight. I'm not seeing a good in-between move, at least, because if we hit their queen, I think they might have the option of... They could always capture this pawn, of course, but... let's just look at this quickly. This doesn't work, so they would probably take the pawn here. I think we could play that afterwards, rather hitting their queen if they allow us to. Instead, I think they are likely to capture this pawn, and then we will have a pawn imbalance with 2 pawns here against 3 and 4 against 3 on the king side. If they take here, and we take and they take, could we exploit this diagonal? I don't think we could do so straight away, but we might have an idea of a long-term check here. Alternatively, I'm liking the idea of perhaps playing our knight up here. If they capture, this is a check. But I'm not seeing a good follow-up, so we might as well keep this defended. And we might also choose to keep this tension here. We have the option here, I think, of either capturing, after which I'm not seeing a good move straight away, or we might go on ahead and grab this file. I'm leaning towards playing this move simply because it brings their king onto this diagonal, and we could have an idea of a check here at some point. Let's have a look at this even. That's not necessarily a good move, but takes, and then grabbing this file I think should work quite well. And then I think we'll go on ahead and put our rook here. Our opponent still has a ways to go to get their rooks connected. The thing I'm also liking here is this cuts away their knight's developing square, so they can't easily connect their rooks if they don't go to this awkward square on the edge of the board. And once we threaten rook to d7, they might have to keep this pawn defended by either the rook or the queen at all times. The queen drops back, which probably seeks to play this knight move here. Could we just start doubling up our rooks as quickly as possible? I think that might be an idea here. Which square should we go to? I'm also looking at this weak pawn, but it's not easily accessible to us, I think. We don't have any ideas of hitting this square with our queen either. So for to look strictly at rook moves, I just want to see whether this works for us or not. I don't think that works. We can't capture here because they can capture and this wins for them. So we might just go ahead and play the more safe approach by playing further back. I don't see the difference between those two squares here, as our opponent is likely to play this either way, but we will play here defending this pawn. This knight here looks at our pawn and defends it, so we are allowed to move our a1 rook. They develop here to the edge of the board. So let's have a look at their options. If we go here, could they generate a threat? This would threaten to capture this pawn, but then we could push our pawn, and they can't go here as they would lose to this. They can't go here. They could go here, but that wouldn't do all that much. They could go here. Alternatively, they could move here from this square, but I'm not seeing where their follow-up would be. This would take away this square from us, or it might seek to do so, but I'm not really seeing it. So now it's going to be difficult for our opponent to get their rooks onto the open file, as we would be able to capture straight away. So our opponent might even play something like queen to e7 to allow for this kind of a trade. They play this knight move here. But now I think it's going to be awkward for them to play their next move after this, perhaps. None of those squares here seem to work. All of those would lose the knight, so they would have to jump back. Let's have a look at this. We are going to create weaknesses by playing like this, so we would have to make sure they would be justified. If they go back, they would hit this pawn, and our knight would no longer be defended. So I'm not quite liking this. But let's look at this a bit closer. What happens if we jump in afterwards? If they capture and we capture, they could capture this pawn. And we would get to this position. Are we allowed to play our other rook up here then? If they check us, we can go here, but they might have an idea of a perpetual here perhaps, and I'm not really seeing our follow-up. Could we hit their queen here? I'm not really seeing that. Alternatively here, we could move our knight. What I'm looking at now is this forces their knight back here, so we might have ideas of playing here and locking their knight on the edge. They would have to go back through c7, which is both slow and a bit awkward, I think. So let's play this. Our rook will, or knight rather, is going to be a bit weak, but we can move it over here perhaps, or here, and include it in an attack against their king perhaps. It seems like our opponent is still trying to find an alternative to this, which they indeed seem to do. This is quite the move by our opponent. I didn't consider this move, but it might be a really good move. What they want is this, and then their queen is going to have good activity, and we will have split apart our pawns, creating weaknesses. And we can't play this because their knight would capture. So how would we decide to deal with this? I'm not seeing any good alternatives here though to this. But then this pawn is likely to be lost. Both of those pieces here are hanging. But will this be justified by our attack in coming here? Our opponent might have a difficult time dealing with this attack here, I think. And I'm simply not finding a good response apart from capturing. So let's go into their line here, and I think despite us potentially losing a pawn here, we are going to have some compensation in the form of an attack. We always have to think about this diagonal here though, because it's important for hitting both kings. I would potentially like to get our queen onto a dark square to be able to play on those squares. But we don't want to use a tempo unnecessarily here. They defend. And what happens if we play like this? Let's have a quick look here. This would have to be decisive, as otherwise our opponent is going to be up a pawn, and it would be a defended passed pawn on the c6 square. Is there a difference here between this and this move? I guess there is. This takes away this square from our opponent in case they want to check our king along this diagonal. So let's move like this. And now I think our opponent might have an idea of hitting our rook. I would guess with this rook perhaps, but then we would be able to capture. So if they go here, we just bring the other rook up, and if they capture, we maintain this threat, and this rook can't defend this pawn and this pawn here at the same time. Our opponent might try to bring their queen back, for example, trying to force a queen trade then. But then they won't have this active queen at least. What happens if they try to trade on the d file, playing this move, or rather this move for example? They take here instead. So let's have a look at this. Could our opponent defend this? Probably yes. But they would have to do so with their queen. And how would they do so? The only square I'm finding, they could defend like this actually. This would hit this pawn. They could also go for this check, but then they won't have a lot after this, so I guess their best option is probably here, hitting this pawn and defending this. So let's have a look at this line here. We are going to go up probably. They will go here. What happens if we capture and then they capture? This would lose this pawn, but then we could take this pawn, for example. And then we would get 2 pawns for 1 and get our pawn, or rather deal with our opponent's pawn majority here. They're up 1 pawn. They go for this. And as we calculated this, we will go ahead and play it. There might have been an argument for pushing this a pawn instead. So they would have to decide between taking the pawn and defending this pawn. But this is a concrete way, at least, of getting their pawns here. They choose to go for this instead. Keeping the defense here, and now we can't take this pawn. But we could play this. We would be keeping our eye here. Honestly, now I'm looking at a3. For the same reason I was before, but then they might have queen to b3 then. But then we would take this pawn, I think. I think we'll play this first. Our opponent could move this rook now, though. So what should we do here? I think I want to move our queen into the game. And then take away their option of playing this. Because currently our queen is not doing a whole lot. I was considering playing a similar move with our rook, but it felt like our queen was essentially useless here, as our opponent could always defend the threat it was making. And this move here might allow us to fork their pawns. But they find this move instead, which is incredibly well played by our opponent. And now they take this pawn. We have to go up here. But we still have the option here of forking their pawns afterwards. Then they have to make a decision. Which one will they defend? They are going to respond with a rook move, and I suspect rook to a8 is going to come then. And then we will have to blockade this a pawn. Let's play this. And after this move, I think we want to capture with the rook. I think we want to keep our pieces on the board here and not trade queens. Then they might look at pushing the pawn. Our problem here is if we play like this, they decide to move their queen back. Probably if a bit afraid of the eventual or potential trade. I'm not saying they couldn't have played this, as our queen's control over the a8 square is rather important here. This disallows our opponent from moving the rook over. They did capture our pawn here though. But this, I think, is not all that bad for us now, because we are able to get rid of their last pawn here. We are going to be down a pawn though, but they won't have an outside passed pawn. Now I think we want to take control over this diagonal, so we don't have any threats to deal with there. So I want to play this move. This might have been better, I'm seeing in hindsight, because it would keep pressure on the f7 pawn. But considering our time situation here, I think just dealing with this diagonal was a good thing to have done. We don't want to discombobulate our pieces too much, we want to keep them defending each other, so we will have to find a decent rook move afterwards. Now this is a bit of a problem here, as now we won't have the threat we could have had against this pawn if we move our rook to a7. We will have to make a move. It might not be the best move, but I didn't find probably the critical move with our remaining time. And now I'm noticing this move might be incredibly powerful. We can't defend our rook by going back, or we could actually do so. They force the queens off the board, and we don't have a choice in the matter. We could go back here, but let's just play like this. And now we are going to play a defensive position here, trying to hold. I'm not quite sure as to the best way of playing this kind of position. I think I want to keep our rook back here a bit and pin this pawn to the king, for example. Now what I'm looking at is this. So if it captures, they have a broken pawn structure, which I'm hoping is going to favor us. And I think this push is not all that bad for us, as our opponent can't get to this pawn. And honestly, they might push like this, which would be a bit awkward. Let's move our king up. And if they check here, I think we might go on ahead and hit the rook. But what if their king goes up? We might have this check from behind, picking up a pawn. They have to be quite careful here, as those two pawns here might get easily targeted by our rook. F6 might be played, which they do. And here I'm actually thinking of bringing our rook back defensively. This disallows their king here from coming up. But I'm noticing here this might be a bit difficult to defend rather. But we will have this move and this follow up. They opt to trade rooks. This would be bad for us, as they would have the king activity. Let's move back and check them. It's going to be difficult to stop f5. Let's just pin them first and see what they do. We might be in a position where we should go on ahead and check from behind, because then they might have difficulties keeping all their pawns safe. So if they move up here to try to eventually get this pawn moving, then I think we might have time to play rook to b8. Because I'm noticing this doesn't favor us trading rooks here. They can't move the king up. I still think we have this defensive resource here. So let's hit the rook. Do they have this? They don't play it. This is not an option. Let's play rook to h8. Now this is a threat, but not immediately. We just have to pose difficulties for our opponent, and I think this might be a good way of doing so. They're probably going to push f5 though. They don't. How about we hit their king, forcing it back? This comes with a check. I think we have to move over this way. This might be wrong though. It's difficult with our lack of time here. What will happen if they go for this? I think we are forced into this line though. The critical approach might be hitting the rook. I'm not seeing a good move, but this at least wouldn't be all that bad, I think. Now they can't push the pawn. Our pieces are a bit too discombobulated for my liking here. I think we will have to go on back with our rook and hit them from behind again. We can play this now. I don't think we are allowed to push this pawn, but we could try. Because I'm not seeing a way of getting in with our rook after this. They created this wall. Let's have a look here. Take. I don't have time to calculate. This might be losing, or it might not be. Yeah, it's probably losing, I think, but I didn't see an alternative. If it is losing though, we might want to just let the pawn drop and keep our rook to have some chances here. Captures, captures, captures. And once our opponent's king gets back to g5, we are going to get force back and they will push the pawns. So after this, we have to move our rook. This doesn't accomplish a whole lot, I think. It would be a check if they go here. This might be an idea. But they would just block with the rook, I think. It's awkward not having enough time to properly calculate the endgame here, but we will go on ahead and hope our opponent makes a mistake, I think. This runs into the same problem as last time. And now they could just push the pawn, I think. This is probably an objectively lost endgame, but we will try to create some chances. Let's go on around and try to harass them from the side. This might be awkward. Let's have a quick look here. I'm curious as to which move would be best in response. Is this possible, locking this other pawn? Can they play this? Probably yes. Let's check them. They can't block with the rook. And now we we could try to hit their pawns. You can check them again. But now this is not good for us. Once we trade rooks, we're going to be in a bad spot. We might just go on ahead and try checking from behind again instead. As I mentioned, this is still probably objectively losing, but we might find some way of creating some counterplay here. Our opponent here, Boris Fedotov, is playing quite well though, so I do have to say kudos to them. Maybe cut their king off. Because those ideas here seemed a bit awkward. They could still push that pawn though. And this I think would be awkward to deal with. This would allow their king to move up. How about we slide on over? Either pawn push might be winning. But I think if we move our rook of the 8th, of the 4th rank, at least, their king is going to be a bit powerful. This I think we don't mind, as they can't really push this pawn now, because then we take the rook. But they could threaten a checkmate here though, by moving the rook like this, which is worrying me a bit here. As much as I want to create a threat against those pawns here with our rook, I think it's more important to keep their king away. This is forced. And now they do get a queen. That's well played by them. This, and they promote. Let's let them get the promotion and then we can resign, because it would be losing. Or rather, it would have been checkmate in 1, I think, if they played that. But now either way, they are going to get a queen here, and we will go on ahead and lose the game. So we will resign and say thanks for the game. I see we made a lot of mistakes here, so I'm curious as to where we made them and how we should have played differently, as per usual. Once again, well played to Boris Fedotov. Let's jump on ahead into our game review. We played with an accuracy of 77.8 today, and our opponent played with 81.4. The opening here was quite atypical. I'll just include the evaluation bar here to make it easier to follow this game review. We did have an advantage here out of the opening with their slow advancement here. The computer did want us to play h3, however, which is somewhat unintuitive to me, simply because getting the bishop here like this seemed good to me, at least. Here we did play the right moves, but we should have apparently taken the file in this position like we considered. I advocated for bringing their king out here, but we never got to take advantage of their king being on this diagonal. Sorry, this diagonal here. So we should have probably just moved up as quickly as possible. Well, we still had an advantage here though. But I did not see this move. Why is this a winning move? I see. Or do I? I thought they would lose the defense of this knight, but queen e7 is followed with by this check. And then they would be pinned. And here we even have... We don't have this move, but we could put pressure on the pin. And then we should have captured here with a check. And this is a bit awkward to find in the game. So we went with this move instead, looking to just double our rooks as quickly as possible. This seems to have been an okay move, but the computer still wanted us to play our queen rather, to f4. I have to admit I simply did not consider this at all during the game. And in this position we did still have a slight advantage. Whoa. This was not all that bad, but here we should have apparently already pushed our pawn. This was equal still. This was apparently the incorrect recapture. I thought if we captured with our queen here, then they might be able to play this and it would be difficult to stop this pawn. Was my logic at least. Well, we got to this position. But I guess it makes a bit sense looking in hindsight here, as they did get the second pawn here from us playing like this. This was a mistake. As I mentioned, how should we have played this? They would have captured here as a desperado and taken our queen. I did not see that response. I thought after finding rook to a3 we would be fine in this position, but we were not quite fine. Here we still had a slightly losing endgame, but I'm curious as to whether we had a chance of drawing this or not. We had a win. This is the kind of position that it's always incredibly annoying to find in hindsight. But of course this, and here we would have won the rook. That's unfortunate, what can I say? I simply stopped my calculation at captures and thought this would not work. Well, that's what happens in time of troubles. We went over here and we were back to once again a losing position. But here, yeah, we should have played this move simply because we would have kept our pawns alive. I thought for some reason this would be okay, but I didn't have enough time to calculate the following lines. And I suspect from this point onwards we probably didn't have any chances of drawing the game. We simply had the one chance of winning the rook. So we got to this position and resigned, as they would have gotten a queen on the next move. Well, that's our game for today, guys. Thanks a lot for watching, and I hope to see you all tomorrow. Bye bye.